Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we would try to comprehensively analyze 9 articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express, especially from the perspective of the upcoming UPSC mains examination. In the first article, we'll talk about the meaning, importance, and the challenges associated with cooperative federalism in India. In the second article, we'll talk about the issue of urban flooding and the serious consequences it has on human life. In the third article, we'll talk about the concept of natural farming. In the fourth article, we'll talk about the very important India-Australia Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement. In the fifth article, we'll talk about the International Space Station. Finally, in the Prelims Snippet sections, we'll have a look at some of the very important topics for the preliminary exam. Now, the very first article is related to the cooperative federalism. So, after the newly constituted Lok Sabha, we had the first meeting of the Governing Council of the Niti Aayog. Now, in that particular meeting, one of the chief ministers in India highlighted the importance of cooperative federalism. So, we'll see what the meaning of cooperative federalism is, what is its importance, and what are the challenges, right? Now, this is a part of GS2, issues and challenges pertaining to the federal structure. Now, talking about the word federalism, it is derived from a Latin word fidus, right? And this means a treaty or an agreement, right? Therefore, the federalism is a system of the government where the powers are divided between the center and its constituents. For example, the states or the provinces, right? So, where the powers are adequately divided. Now, what we see is that in a country like India, where we have got different states and different states have multiple cultures, this concept of federalism becomes very important, right? So what we see is that the idea of federalism in India is of pivotal importance. But what we have seen is that many of the constitutional experts, and if you give a thorough reading of the Constitution of India, what you would see is that there is a dominance of the center with respect to the state when it comes to the distribution of powers and authority, right? And therefore, many of the constitutional experts, for example, we have Mr. K.C. Viere, who described the Indian Constitution as quasi-federal, right? We also had one of the constitutional experts, Morris Jones, who described the Indian constitutional setup as bargaining federalism, right? What we see is then there was another constitutional expert, a very prominent constitutional expert, Granville Austin, who described the Indian constitutional setup as cooperative federalism, right? So what is cooperative federalism? Now, this concept of cooperative federalism, it implies that the system is overall dependent on the interdependence and the cooperation among the states and the center, right? So where the federalism is dependent among the interdependence and the cooperation among these two things, that is the center and the states. Now, this concept of cooperative federalism was also taken up by the judiciary, and it was in the year 1977 in the famous case of State of Rajasthan versus Union of India, where the Supreme Court of India said very categorically that there is a dominance of cooperative federalism when it comes to the interactions among the states and the center, right? Now, what is the need of cooperative federalism in India? The very first need is that it promotes social justice. See, once we have got different developmental agendas being worked upon by the government, so the concept of cooperative federalism, it tries to integrate the needs and aspirations of different parts of the countries. That is the needs and aspirations of different states. Therefore, it promotes social justice. Next is it ensures accommodation. That is, we have got people from varied backgrounds, different ethnicities, social backgrounds in different part of the country, right? So once you have got this concept of cooperative federalism, it tries to incorporate their views in the overall decision-making process, right? Next is it ensures the stability and growth. See, please understand that majority of the implementation of different schemes, it is done by the state government, right? So it is very necessary to give them adequate space, to give them adequate power. And here the concept of cooperative federalism becomes very important. So therefore, what we see is that if you have this setup of cooperative federalism, then it ensures greater stability and growth of the whole country. Next is that there are many contemporary issues which involved or which required the need of cooperative federalism. For example, you must be aware of the COVID-19. So during the COVID-19 crisis, what we saw was that the center really, it was dependent on these states with respect to carrying out the necessary pandemic management practices, right? So that is what we see, that there is a dire need of cooperative federalism among different states, that is with respect to the center. Now, what are the constitutional provisions which talk about the cooperative federalism? So there are some specific constitutional provisions which directly showcase the cooperative federalism. First is we have Article 54. Now, this article of the Constitution of India, it provides that the member of the legislative assemblies of the states, they are to be the part of the electoral college for the elections to the office of the president, right? Next, we have got Article 80. Now, this talks about the institutionalization of the Raj Sabha. Now, Raj Sabha as a house, it basically promotes the interest of the states. Next, we have Article 246, read with Schedule 7. Now, please understand that this article through the Schedule 7, it actually categorizes the different subject matter in 3 lists. We have the union list, we have the state list, we have the concurrent list. Now, as far as the union list is concerned, the parliament is solely entitled to make laws with respect to that. Then we have got the state list, where the state has the authority to make laws with respect to the subject matters in the state list. But in certain cases, the parliament is also authorized to make a law. Then we have got the concurrent list, where both the center and the states can make a law. However, in case of a conflict, it is the will of the union which prevails. Next, we have Article 261. Now, this provides full faith and credit to the records, to the public records, to the judicial proceedings of both the center and the states. Thus, it encourages more cooperation and faith building among these two organs, that is, the states and the union. Next, we have got Article 262. See, it actually empowers the parliament to adjudicate those cases with respect to the interstate water disputes, right? So it's a very important article. Then we have got Article 263. Now, this provides for the institutionalization of the interstate council. Now, this council is empowered to investigate those concerns which are basically important for both the center as well as the states, right? So these are some of the constitutional provisions. Now, talking about some of the other mechanisms, so we have got the institution of Niti Aayog. Now, Niti Aayog as an institution, it replaced the erstwhile Planning Commission. Now, can you tell me that is Niti Aayog a constitutional body? Now, you need to also give me a reason for that. Let me see who answers first in the comment section. Now, see, Niti Aayog has different mechanisms. For example, we are just studying about the Governing Council. So, the Governing Council, it consists of the chief ministers of all the states, the lieutenant governors of the union territories, right? So, it's a very important mechanism of interaction. Then we have got the Team India. Now, the Team India has representatives from both the center as well as the states. Then we have got the Knowledge and Innovation Hub. Now, this Knowledge and Innovation Hub, it acts as a think tank which provides input to both the center as well as the states. Then we have got various programs. For example, we have got the Sustainable Action for Transforming Human Capital, right? Now, it's a very important program considering the increasing importance of human capital. Then we have got various indices which are produced by the Niti Aayog. For example, we have got the School Education Quality Index, right? Then we have got Composite Water Management Index. Now, these indices, they also promote the spirit of competitive federalism, right? Next, we have the Goods and Services Tax. Now, we all know that Goods and Services Tax, it provided for a uniform taxation system in the country, across the country. And it also provided for a uniform market, right? So, that is very important. And you must be aware that we have got Article 279A of the Indian Constitution. Now, this article very clearly mentions about the GST Council. Now, GST Council, as a decision-making body, it also includes the states within its ambit. Then we have got the centrally sponsored schemes. Now, see, these schemes are the initiatives of the central government, primarily implemented in different states, where the majority of the funding, the significant portion of the funding is done by the central government. And the states also have the flexibility to adapt according to their needs, right? So that is one of the aspects. Then we have the zonal councils. See, we had the State Reorganization Act of 1956. Now, this act actually provided for the establishment of different zonal councils according to different regions. Now, can you just tell me that who acts as the chairman of a particular zonal council and who acts as the vice chairperson? Let me see who answers first in the comment section, right? So, we have got zonal councils. Also, what you need to keep in mind is that we also have a zonal council for Northeast. We have got Northeast Council. Now, this was made under a separate law. That is Northeastern Councils Act of 1971. So do remember, right? So these are some of the mechanisms which actually highlight the importance of cooperative federalism. Now, what are the factors which hinder the cooperative federalism in India? The very first is over centralization. What do you mean by that? See, I just told you that we have got Article 246 read with Schedule 7. Now, this particular article, as I said, we have got three lists: the union list, the state list, and the concurrent list. Now, first of all, the union list has more items when it comes to the state list, when you compare it with the state list. Then some of the subject matter in the union list, they are of crucial, extreme importance. For example, the defense of India or the regulation of money and currency. Now, this solely lies in the domain of the union list. Then what we see is that in certain cases, in certain circumstances, the union is empowered, the parliament is empowered to make a law with respect to the state list. And if there is a conflict with respect to a subject in the concurrent list among the states and the center, it is the will of the union which prevails. So what we see is that there is a dominance of the union over the states. Next is we have got Article 356. Please understand that this actually relates to the precedence rule in the states. From 1947 till 77, in a period of 30 years, precedence rule was imposed for 44 times. Can you imagine? So what we see is, and mostly this precedence rule was imposed on arbitrary grounds, right? There was no adequate justification for it, right? And it was the case of SR Bomai versus Union of India in the 1994, where Supreme Court put limitations on the use of this precedent rule by the center, right? Then we have got the limitations with respect to the Interstate Council. See, please understand that Interstate Council as an institution has not been used much. In the last 50 years, it has only been used two times, right? Moreover, the recommendations of the Interstate Councils, they are not of binding nature. They're just of recommendatory nature, right? Next is there is strong feeling of regionalism. What we see is that there has been a growing tendency of strong regional feelings in different parts of the country. Now, this feeling, it weakens the scope of cooperation among different states and the interaction of that particular state with the center, right? It also leads to fissiparous tendencies, secessionist tendencies, right? So you must keep that in mind. Then we have got a uniform approach by the center. What has been often seen is that there has been a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to the policies of the center. The needs and aspirations of the states are not taken into consideration, right? So that obviously has a negative influence. Then we have got fiscal federalism. See, please understand that when it comes to the taxation powers in the country, they are heavily skewed in favor of the center. The states have very less taxation powers in comparison to the center. Moreover, we had this institutionalization of GST. Has GST truly changed the picture on the ground? Many critics say no, it hasn't changed the picture on the ground, and some of the states, they are even saying that the institutionalization of GST has negatively affected them, right? Then there are administrative challenges. What do you mean by administrative challenges? See, there's a shortage of staff. There's a shortage of financial resources when it comes to the center. There is red tapeism which is involved. So these are some of the factors which hinder the interaction or the adequate sort of channel of linkage between the states and the center. So these are some of the factors. Now, what can be the way forward? See, we had two very important commissions. First is the Sarkaria Commission of 1987, and then we have got the Punchi Commission of 2010. Now, both these were tasked to make sure that we have got recommendations which can facilitate and improve the interactions among the central and the state governments, right? So it proposed a lot of recommendations. One of the recommendations was that the office of the governor should be made apolitical. See, what we are recently witnessing is that the office of the governor is in the news, mostly because this office is being seen as the agent of the center. Now, what we need to keep in mind is that this is a very pious constitutional post. It should not be seen, or it should not be, the person holding this position should not act in such a way that the people say that he's or she is acting as an agent of the center, right? So it should be apolitical. Next is restricting the use of precedence rule. We need to keep in mind that Article 356 should be used sparingly, and that is what the Supreme Court has also said. It should be used only when the circumstances deem it fit to be used, right? So that should not be misused. Next is extending the mandate of the interstate councils. What we need to make sure is that the recommendations of the interstate council, first of all, it should be made sure that the interstate council meets frequently and the recommendations are binding in nature, right? Next, there should be a time limit with respect to the governor's decision with respect to the passage of the bills. What we are recently witnessing is, and you can also see it from the petitions filed by the Kerala government in the Supreme Court of India, that the governor has been holding its hand on the different bills which are already passed by the legislative assemblies, right? So that is somewhat an infringement on the legislative powers which are given by the constitution to the states. So these are some of the specific recommendations. Next, we can also have some of the general recommendations. First is that we need to strengthen the intergovernmental mechanisms. See, we have got different constitutional, for example, the interstate council, or some of the statutory, for example, the other zonal councils, or for example, some of the executive. Now you need to tell me which is the body which is constituted through the executive direction. So we have got different mechanisms, right, for the interaction. So such mechanisms need to be used more effectively and more frequently so that the interactions among the states and the center increase. Next is promoting fiscal federalism. What we need to keep in mind is the states are the ones who are actually implementing the developmental policies on the ground. So they need to be given adequate responsibilities. Now this should be actually taken into consideration by the Finance Commission. The Finance Commission should recommend adequate financial resources to the states, and the central government should actually follow those recommendations. Next is strengthening institutional frameworks. Now, what we mean by this is that whatever the institutions are, now this can be also linked with point one, whatever different institutions are for the interactions among the states and the center, they need to be strengthened. Be it the policy making bodies, be it the regular interactions among different states, that needs to be enhanced. Next is avoiding the one size fits all approach. Now this is very important. What we see is that, we really can't compare the developmental aspirations of Maharashtra with that of Jharkhand, right? Both have different demographics, both have different aspirations. So the center cannot have a one size fits all approach. We need to make sure that we have a policy sort of setup where the different needs of the states are taken into consideration, right? Next is empowering the local governments. Now, this is very, very important. See, in order to truly realize the vision of grassroots democracy, what we need to make sure is that the local governments are given adequate funds, functions, and functionaries. They need to be given adequate powers so that they can carry out the development on the basis of their own needs, right? So what we see is that definitely cooperative federalism is the need of the hour. And what we need to make sure is that the center does not arbitrarily impose its sort of dominance on the states. And there's a need to make sure that the states are given adequate financial resources, other resources, so that they can truly implement the developmental priorities on the ground, the developmental programs on the ground. So that is what the center needs to make sure. Now, before we go to the next topic, we have a very important previous year's question. Now, the first question is with respect to the year 2015, and the second question is with respect to the year 2020. I really want you guys to write an answer on these two questions. They're very important. The concept of cooperative federalism has been increasingly emphasized in the recent years, highlight the drawbacks in the existing structure and the extent to which the cooperative federalism would answer the shortcomings. The second question is, how far do you think cooperation, competition, and confrontation have shaped the nature of federation in India? Cite some recent examples to validate your answer. Let me see who answers this and post in the comment section, right? So the next article is with respect to the urban flooding. So what we are recently witnessing is the monsoon season, and many parts of the country, they are actually being greatly affected by the urban floods. So we have got the cities like Pune, Mumbai, or Delhi, where certain parts, they are greatly affected because of this urban flood, where the lives of the common people is being affected greatly, right? Also, we have got the example in Pune, where the army, the National Disaster Response Force, with the fire brigade have been mobilized so as to rescue the people who are affected because of the urban flooding. Now, this is with respect to GS1 urbanization and GS3 disaster management. Now, what we have seen is that in the last decade, there has been an increasing intensity of the rainfalls. The frequency has been increasing, right? And that is what is causing sort of high intensity rainfalls, right? Because of the climate change. And that is obviously leading to urban flooding. So how to define the urban flooding? See, it is basically the inundation of the land or property in a built environment, right? So here the differentiating factor lies with respect to the built environment. How can you differentiate the rural flooding with respect to the urban flooding? Rural flooding is mostly in the low-lying areas, plain areas, whereas the urban flooding is in a built environment, primarily in those regions where you have a densely populated structure. along with this drainage system which is overwhelmed by the capacity of the rains. So you have got the drainage systems, be it the man-made or the natural. Now once they are overwhelmed because of the rainfall, then it leads to the flooding of the urban areas. That is how we define the urban flooding. Now it is more disastrous than the rural floods. Why we say so is that the flood peaks in the urban areas, that is almost 1.8 to 8 times than the rural floods, and the flood volumes, it is almost 6 times. Right, now the data says so. Right, next is the effects of the urban floods. It is primarily aggravated because of certain reasons. First is the dense population. So we already know that in many of the urban areas in the country, we have got slums, right? We have got the slums spread in different parts of the cities. Now, these slums are densely populated and they're mostly on the low-lying areas. Therefore, what we see is that these people are the ones who are mostly affected, right? Next, we have got the unplanned growth. What we have seen is that most of the cities in India, they don't even have a proper master plan. That is a proper long-term strategic plan for their growth. And the growth has been haphazard. It has not been planned. So that is what is leading to these urban floods. Next is we have got poor drainage systems. See, we need to understand that in most of the cities in India, the drainage systems is of British times, or if it has been constructed, it is not constructed with adequate construction materials, right? So mostly the drainage system in India, it is dilapidated, right? Next, we have got the increased risk of infections, obviously. So if you have the drainage system which is affected because of this polluted water, it obviously leads to different waterborne illnesses, for example, cholera, typhoid, right? So that is one of the greatest concerns. Now, what are the causes of urban flooding in India? The first and foremost is the encroachment on the natural drainage channels. See, please understand that urban areas, they are witnessing rapid growth. Right, and the land in the urban areas, that has become a commodity. There has been a commodification of the land, and that is what is leading to a nexus. That is nexus between the real estate agents, the local authorities, and the land mafias, right? And that is what is leading to the encroachment of the natural drainage channels. For example, we have rivers, or we have lakes, right? So these are being encroached upon. Now, please understand that these rivers or the lakes, they act as natural sponges, right? Which actually provide the ability to divert the water, the excess water, if you have certain conditions like urban floods. But as of now, what we are witnessing is that these have been encroached upon, and therefore what we are witnessing is the rise of the water levels. Next is inadequate drainage system, as we just discussed, that most of the drainage systems in India, they are insufficient or they are old, right? And they're not in the condition to manage the current population trends, the current population growth, right? So they're in dilapidated conditions, right? So what we see is that because these drainage systems are not sufficient, they don't have the adequate capacity, there is the rise of the urban floods. Next, we have got poor urban planning. The cities in India, they are growing with a fast pace, as also the United Nations says that by the year 2050, almost 68% of the total population of the country would live in urban areas. So therefore, there's a need of proper master plans. There's a need of proper long-term strategic plans. But that is not what we see. That there is a very poor sort of urban planning when it comes to different cities in India. Next is solid waste and debris. What we see is that a lot of plastic waste and a lot of non-biodegradable waste is a part of the drainage system. Now that clogs the drainage system, and then once it clogs, it obviously leads to the water logging, right? And increase in the level of water in the urban areas. Next is deforestation and loss of green spaces. As I told in the first point, that there has been an encroachment, especially by the real estate agents. Now, please understand, once you have got these green spaces, these forests which are actually being removed, what we see is that the capacity of the water, capacity of the land to hold that moisture, it reduces, right? And the water runs off with great speed, and thus it has two consequences. One, that the water is not absorbed. The other, that the water runoff, it leads to the erosion of the soil, right? So that is what is leading to more soil erosion and the degradation of the land. Next is the climate change. as we started in the beginning of this topic, that we have got human-induced climate change, and that is what is leading to the erratic rainfall patterns, and that is what is leading to the changes in the intensity and the frequency of the rainfalls, right? So that's what you need to keep in mind. Then there is a lack of public awareness and preparedness. When it comes to these urban flooding events, people are not aware about it, right? They're not made to know about the drills which are necessary so as to make them capable to deal with certain crisis, such type of crisis. So there is a need to enhance the awareness. There needs to be a community awareness. The government should make people to know that there is a need for collective actions when there is a situation like this, right? Now, what is the impact of urban flooding? The first and the foremost is the loss of life and injuries. Now, what happens is, once you have got the urban flooding, there is a sudden splash of water in urban areas, and that does not even give the adequate time to the person to come out, and therefore the person remains trapped, and sometimes it leads to the even death of that particular person, right? Next is damage to the property and infrastructure. Such events of urban flooding, it affects the land, the buildings, various infrastructures around the city. Now, this obviously has economic ramifications also, because see, capital infrastructure is something which takes a lot of money. It requires a lot of financial resources. But once you have got these urban flood, it totally destroys such buildings or bridges or other infrastructures. Next, we have got the disruption of essential services. See, we have got certain essential services, the communications, the transport, the railways, right? So once you have got this urban flooding, it gives a halt to all these services, and thus it affects the very life of a common man, right? Next is the disaster induced displacement. Generally, whenever we have the rescue operations, what is done is that in the events of urban floods, these people are made to go to somewhere else, right? So for a considerable period of time, they remain homeless, right? And that is what actually enhances the vulnerability of these people, especially when we talk about the women and the children. Next is the spread of waterborne illnesses. As we just talked in the beginning, that you have the mixing of the polluted water with that of the drainage systems, the natural drainage systems, right? So once you have got the mixing of the polluted water or the sort of or the contaminants, what happens is that it can lead to the growth of waterborne illnesses, cholera, typhoid, or other illnesses, right? Next is the environmental degradation. Obviously, once you have the encroachment of the natural drainage systems, for example, the rivers or the lakes, or you have got the deforestation, it affects the environment very badly. And once you have the situation of urban floods, the water runoffs with a great speed, and that actually removes the top layer of the soil, and that reduces the retention capacity of the soil, right? So what should be the way forward, right? The first thing is that we need to promote the concept of sponge cities. Now, this concept, it primarily originated in China. Now, over there, the infrastructure projects are being made in such a way that around every building, you have certain open spaces. Now, in those open spaces, whenever you have got excess rainfall, those spaces can adequately absorb or retain that particular water, right? And it won't lead to the condition of urban floods. So that is what the Indian cities should also learn from. Next is overhauling the drainage infrastructure. Very important. First and foremost is that these dilapidated conditions of these drainage systems that need to be enhanced. A proper construction activity should be started in certain areas. Mapping should be done. So the next point is obviously the mapping of the flood prone areas. So there are certain areas, low-lying areas in a particular city which are more prone to such urban floods. So priority has to be given to such areas, and we need to make sure that the drainage system of these areas is made in such a way that the excess water automatically goes to the more low-lying areas or to the rivers or to other drainage systems, right? The natural drainage systems. So as I said, we need to map the flood prone areas and develop appropriate flood management strategies. The district administration or the city administration, the municipalities, they need to come with proper strategies. Proper financial resources should be given to these authorities so that they can actually mobilize those personnel, those equipments at the right time and save the human life. Next is establish and strengthen the early warning system. Now, this is really important. We already have the Indian Meteorological Department, which can predict the signs of heavy rainfalls. But what we see is that the information dissemination is not clear. We have the organizations at the central level or the state level, but the information is not percolated, it's not disseminated at the right time to the local bodies. So that is what we need to make sure. Also, there can be other communication mechanisms through the social media where the people are made sure they're informed about the possible sort of events, rainfall events, which might sort of cause havoc in that particular area, so that they can take the adequate steps. So what we see is that this condition of urban flooding, it is causing a sort of a serious effect on human lives. What we need is a proper strategy, and we need to make sure that such events don't sort of happen again and the human life is saved. So what we need to do is we need to incorporate such measures. We need to make sure that the local authorities, the administration, the police, they act swiftly. And what we can see is that, as we have seen in Pune, different authorities should act in coherence. For example, we have the NDRF, we have the police, we have the fire brigade. They should come together and make sure that the human lives are not affected and there is the minimal sort of loss to the properties as well. Now, before we go to the next topic, there is a particular question. Now, this is from the year 2020. The question says, account for the huge flooding of million cities in India, including the smart ones like Hyderabad and Pune. Suggest lasting remedial measures. Now, I really want you to answer this question and, if possible, post in the comment section. So, the next article is with respect to the natural farming. So, recently, the budget 2024-25 has announced that it would integrate almost 1 crore farmers into the natural farming in the next 2 years with the help of the support provided by the certification and branding. Now, this would be done by the Bioresources Center. So we'll see what is natural farming, what are the benefits of natural farming, what are the challenges, and what should be the way forward. Now, this is with respect to GS3 agriculture. Now, see, what is natural farming? As a word itself says, right? So it involves a chemical-free farming method, right? Which is totally dependent on the traditional practices, and it uses the locally available resources. Next is that it is based on agroecology. That is, what it means is that it tries to integrate the local crops, the trees, and the livestock in the whole process. Then it also uses the beneficial microorganisms. Now, this helps to improve the soil quality and the health, the overall health. Now, what we need to keep in mind is that there is a concept of zero budget natural farming, right? So we have got the zero budget natural farming, and it was the budget of 2019 and 20, which actually started this concept of zero budget natural farming. Now, this idea was originally proposed by Subhash Palekar, and he even received, the Padam Shri in the year 2016 for this. Now, see, why he actually brought this idea was that there were many farmers who were relying on sort of many pesticides or fertilizers or other sort of sources, and that was leading to a sort of drain of resources on their part, and it was primarily because as a result of the green revolution. So it emerged as a result of the farmers which were burdened by the debt because of the green revolution. So the word zero budget, it implies minimal expenditure on the inputs. Now, what it means is that the cost of the crops, cost of cultivating the main crop, it is actually borne by offsetting the profits which are generated on the basis of the intercrops. So we have got the profits which are generated because of the intercrops. So on the basis of that, we actually use those profits and utilize it for cultivating the main crop. Now, again, there are some of the very important components of natural farming. For example, we have got the Bijamrit, right? So what it means is that the process includes treatment of seeds using cow dung, urine, and lime-based formulations. Then we have got Vapsa. So it means the process involves activating earthworms in the soil in order to create water vapor condensation. Then we have got the plant protections. The process involves spraying of biological concoctions, which prevents pest, disease, and weed problems and protects the plant and improves the overall soil fertility. Then we have got Jivamrit. Now, this process enhances the fertility of the soil using cow urine, dung, flour of pulses, and jaggery concoctions. Then we have got the mulching. Now, this process involves creating microclimate using different mulches with trees, crops, biomass to conserve the soil moisture. So these are some of the very essential components of the natural farming. Now, recently, what we have is a particular scheme, the natural farming scheme. Now, this is being initiated as a part of the Bharatiya Prakritik Krishi Paddhati. Now, the total budget for this scheme is around 4,650 crores, right? And it is from the period 2019-20 till 2024-25. right? So that is the duration of this particular scheme. Now, this budget has specifically, as we started in the beginning, it has proposed that almost 1 crore farmers are to be integrated into this chain of natural farming, and that would be done with the support given by the certification and branding. Now, this certification and branding would be primarily done by the need-based bio-input resource centers with the help of the gram panchayats, right? So that is what the structure of the scheme is all about. Now, talking about the benefits of the scheme. Now, we can primarily categorize this into 3 aspects. First is the environmental benefits. Now, see, we have got the practices like composting or sort of mulching. Now, this basically enhances the quality of the soil. It makes sure that the soil has more water retention capacity. Therefore, it leads to a healthy soil. Next is the water conservation. See, natural farming, it involves practices like drip irrigation. It involves practices like mulching. Now, both these practices, they ensure that enough water is stored in the soil itself, right? So it reduces the need of excess water. Next is reduced pollution. Since the process of natural farming, it's not dependent on the chemical fertilizers and pesticides, there is the reduced inflow of these pollutants in the water, in the sort of mainstream drainage, and therefore it does not affect the human life, right? Next is the climate change mitigation. Obviously, so if we are not using the chemical fertilizers, it has less carbon footprint on the environment. We are using the locally manufactured biopesticides or biofertilizers. Next is what are the benefits with respect to the farmers. First is reduced cost. Now see, the farmer is now not dependent on the external supply of these chemical fertilizers or pesticides, right? So he is totally dependent on the locally available sources. So it reduces the overall cost to that particular farmer. Then improved farm resilience. What has been seen in the studies is that the natural farming is more resilient to the extreme weather events like floods, or we have got the droughts, right? Next is enhanced farmer health. Once the farmer uses the chemical fertilizers, he is exposed to some of the very harmful chemicals. But once he is using the natural pesticides or the biopesticides or the biofertilizers, he is not exposed to such pollutants. Therefore, there is a very less risk to his health. What are the consumer benefits? First is safer foods. Now, there has been a growing tendency among the urban populace to consume more natural foods, right? Natural, I mean to say natural, that is organic food or natural foods, which do not contain this sort of pollutant, the environmental pollutants, or which do not contain the chemical residues, right? So obviously they're getting the safer food. Then we have got the improved food quality. Now, different research have shown that the food products from the natural farming, it has more of the antioxidants or the nutritive content in it, right, compared to what we see through the conventional agriculture systems. Next is support for sustainable agriculture. See, if we have got the consumers who are really inclined for such products, then it gives an impetus, it gives a boost to the natural farming, and obviously then it leads to a more ethical and a more sustainable agriculture. Now, what are the challenges with respect to the natural farming? First is that there is a limited market. What do we mean by this? That we don't have a specific market for these natural products or organic products, and therefore it leads to reduced returns or low returns for the farmers. Then we have got lack of certification and standardization. Still in the country, we don't have those adequate facilities which can distinguish between the product which is sourced from the conventional farming or the product which is sourced from the organic farming or the natural farming. Then lower initial yields. So various studies, for example, we did these studies, there were studies in Andhra Pradesh, which actually said that initially, once a farmer starts the natural farming, it gives a very low return. So that serves as a disincentive to that particular farmer. For example, in Andhra Pradesh, the initial yields were almost 20% lower, right? Next is lack of awareness and training. See, people are not aware with respect to these specific practices. See, I just told that we have got some of the very important components of the natural farming, and these components have to be followed in letter and spirit. But the farmers itself, or even the consumers, they are not actually aware of what this whole process of natural farming is all about, right? Then there is lack of availability and affordability of organic inputs. What do we mean by this is that there are certain organic seeds which are more expensive, which are expensive than the conventional seeds, or there are certain sort of inputs, the compost or something, which are more expensive. Now, this adds to the disincentive which the farmer has. Next is the pest and disease management. Now, what we see is that the biopesticides, they are not as effective as the chemical pesticides. So that is the reason that some of the natural sort of farming, which was done in Jammu Kashmir for the apples, it actually suffered a lot of loss because the biopesticides were unable to control that particular moth infestations, right? So that is somewhere a point of concern is. Now, what are the measures which can be used to promote the natural farming? The first and foremost is developing alternatives and differentiated markets. See, what we need to make sure is that if you have a proper natural farming system in place, we need to provide a particular segment. We need to streamline the sort of market for this particular product. So what we can use is, we can use the public distribution system, or we can use is the primary agriculture credit societies, cooperative societies, Then we have got the midday meals. Now, the midday meals can be used because over there you can have the adequate nutrition and sort of vitamins for these children in particular. Then we have got dedicated huts. So there can be the institutionalization of these dedicated huts where these products are sold, right? Then we can have farmer produce organizations. Now, this is very important. If you have farmer produce organizations, it would enhance the bargaining power of these farmers, and then they would get a better price. Then the cooperatives can also be used. Now, what we can do is that we can have consumer cooperatives, and on the other hand, we can also have producer cooperatives, so that both can reach to a particular price which is beneficial to both of them. Then we need to have effective implementation of certification. Now, over here, I need to talk about two very important certification mechanisms. See, one is the NPOP. Right. Now, this is carried out by the APIDA. And it is under the overall jurisdiction of the Ministry of Commerce. Now, this is National Program for Organic Production. And then we have got the APIDA. Now, please understand that whenever you have a particular product which is to be exported, we need the NPOP certification. Then we have got the PGS system, Participatory Guarantee Scheme system. Now, this is under the Ministry of Agriculture. Now, this is done by a particular institution under the ministry, whereas the PGS is a community-driven system, right? Now, this is not required, or this is not actually needed for the export, whereas for export you need NPOP. So this is the certification mechanism we have as of now. Now, what we need to have is that these mechanisms, they are not adequately spread. Farmers are not aware about it. So what we need to do is we need to spread these mechanisms, the information with respect to these mechanisms, to the farmers, so that the farmers can benefit out of such certification mechanisms. Then we need to develop awareness. Now, this is very important. Now, developing awareness means not just on the part of the consumer, but also on the part of the producer. So the producers need to be aware of what all the components of the natural farming are. Initially, they can be sort of given the help in terms of the subsidies by the government, the incentives by the government, if the government really wants to transition from the conventional farming to the natural farming. On the other hand, the consumers need to be made aware about the different certification mechanisms, about how they can access these products from the natural farming, right? So definitely what we see is that natural farming is something which is very important, considering the sustainable growth of agriculture. So we need to have a sustainable growth of agriculture, and over there natural farming is obviously very important, but the sudden transition should not take place. We already know what happened in Sri Lanka, right? So it's actually suffered from a tragic economic crisis because the transition was not smooth. It was just carried out within a day, a sudden transition. That should not happen. The transition should be smooth, and the farmers need to be incentivized for that, right? So that we can have a natural and smooth transition from the conventional farming to the natural farming. Now, before we go to the next topic, we have a mains question. So the question says, natural farming in India offers many potential opportunities along with environmental benefits. However, it also suffers from various implementational challenges. Elaborate. So do write an answer on this. Now we have got a prelims related question. Now this is from 2018. So the question says, the National Program for Organic Production (NPOP) is operated under the guidelines and directives of the Union Ministry for Rural Development. The Agriculture and Processed Food Products Export Development Authority (APIDA) functions as the secretariat for the implementation of the NPOP. Sikkim has become the India's first fully organic state. Select the correct options. So we have got 1 and 2 only, 2 and 3 only, 3 only, and 1, 2 and 3. Now let me see who answers first in the comment section. Now the next article is with respect to the India-Australia Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement. So what we recently saw was that the Australian High Commissioner to India, he said that this trade pact is yielding great results. Now we need to see what this trade pact is all about. Now this is with respect to GS3 trade and investments. Now see, This ECTA, India-Australia Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement, this was initially signed in the month of April 2022 and finally it was implemented in December 2022. Now this holds significance for both India as well as Australia. Why it holds importance for India is because that it is the first FTA which India has signed with a major developed country in over a decade. So this is something which is very important. Next is that it would allow duty-free access to about 96% of India's export to Australia. So almost 100% of the exports to the Australia, they would be duty-free, right? It's almost 96%. Next, we have got, it would benefit a lot of industries in India, including textiles, apparel, agriculture, fish productions. Then we have got industry related to furniture, leather, textiles, jewelry, machinery, electrical goods, right? Now, what is the significance for Australia? See, we all know that India's demography, it is offering a very good market opportunities for different countries around the world. And that is the reason that many of these developed countries, because see, the market in the developed countries that is almost saturated. The demand has saturated. So they are looking for new opportunities. And India as a country is a place which can provide almost, one of the greatest opportunities all around the world, right? So that is the reason that we have got an ever expanding market and that provides a very good opportunity for the Australian businesses. So what we see is that there are some specific sectors, for example, education, agriculture, energy, science and innovation. Now over here, there is a sort of prevalence or dominance of the youths, of Indian youth, or we have got a diversified economy, right? So this actually helps Australian businesses to invest in India and to basically make out returns out of it. Next, what are the key sectors which are going to get benefited? First is that the trade agreement provides for duty-free access, as I just told, or to almost 96% of the exports to Australia. So Australian market over 6,000 broad sectors of India. Now this includes textiles, leather, furniture, jewelry, machinery, furniture, electrical goods, and a lot of things. Next, the labor intensive sectors. See, we have a dominance of the textile sector in India. We already know that it is the second highest employment generator in the country after agriculture, right? So we have got the textiles and the apparels, few agriculture and the fresh products, leather and footwear. So the intensive labor sectors, for example, the textiles, they would be hugely benefited. Next, we have got the benefits accruing to the Indian pharmaceutical industry. So see, it has actually simplified the regulatory process. What it has done is the Australian government has agreed to the annex on the pharmaceutical products. What it means is that those Indian medicines which have been actually given a green clearance by the European Union or by the FDA of the US, now they would be allowed to enter into the Australian market. Right. So we won't need a specific clearance mechanism in the Australia for that. Then we have this sort of a data which says that almost 1 million jobs would be created as a result of this ECTA. Once you'll have substantial investments from the Australia coming to India, it would lead to more business opportunities, more opportunities for the young population to join the workforce. Moreover, it offers the advantage of the additional employment almost 40,000 people as a result of increased capacity and investment, specifically in the textile sector. So what we see is, it's a very short time to judge what the sort of effects of these scheme would be, of this trade agreement would be. But initially what we see is that this is faring good for India and Australia, and there needs to be a sort of more focus on different sectors by both Australia and India so that we can truly realize the potential of this particular economic cooperation and trade agreement. So the next topic is with respect to the International Space Station. So what we have recently come to know is that one of the astronauts who would be flying in the Gaganyaan mission, he's supposed to go to the International Space Station very soon, and now this is a part of the collaborative mechanism which the ISRO has with that of NASA. So we need to know what International Space Station is all about. Now see, the International Space Station it's basically a large spacecraft which orbits around the Earth, right? And it orbits around 400 kilometers above the surface of the Earth. Now see, the speed of the orbit, it's around 28,000 kilometers per hour. This means that it orbits almost 90 minutes. After every 90 minutes, it orbits the Earth. Then what we see is that this International Space Station, this is a unique science laboratory. So there are various experiments which are being carried out in the International Space Station. Now, for example, we have got the experiments with respect to the medical science, different medicines, how they work, or the experiments with respect to the microgravity, right? Now, what you need to keep in mind is you have a pictorial representation, a diagram. So you can just see that there are sort of solar arrays, right? Different solar arrays, and and there are different modules. So you can just see there is a one particular module which is a Russian segment. You can just see in this image, right? So there's a Russian segment. Then you have got the other segments, for example, the Harmony module or the US segment. Then you've got a particular segment from there, right? So you have got different segments, different modules. Then the average altitude, which I already talked about, it's around 400 kilometers. Then the habitable volume, it's around 388 meter cube. Then the mass is 419.7 tons, right? Now this is all sourced from NASA. Now what it says is the data is till the 2021. So the continuously occupied since November 2000, 242 individuals from 19 countries have been to the international space stations. Now this becomes important. It is a collaborative work of almost 5 space agencies. So we have got the NASA, that is from the US. Then we have got Roscosmos, that is from the Russia. Then you have got the Japan Space Agency. Then you have got the European Space Agency. Then you have got the Canadian Space Agency, right? So it is a collaborative effort of all these space agencies. Now, what we see is that different modules, as I already told, that we have got different modules, they have got different purpose, all have specific purpose, and accordingly they are used. Next, the first module, if we talk about, it was in the 1998. So it was in 1998 which was used. The Zarya control module was first launched, and it is expected, the International Space Station is expected to remain in the orbit till the year 2030. Now, what is the significance of the international space stations? Now, what we see is first that it serves as a test bed for long duration space flight. What it means is that we have got different astronauts who are made to be a part of the international space stations. Now, over there, they remain there for a certain time period, and then what we see is then the effects on the body, they are actually examined. So that why it is important is that in future, if we have got the missions to Moon or Mars, then we can have the probable studies, and then that could guide the sort of mechanism with respect to how to proceed with that particular flight. Next, space medicine research. Now this is very important for some of the very important diseases, for example, very serious diseases, for example, Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or various cancers. What we have seen is that there has been a particular research which is being conducted in the international space stations, primarily because of the, we have got the microgravity condition over there. So it has definitely led to good results also. Next is human spaceflight expertise. Once you have a particular astronauts in the international space stations, they are made more comfortable, or they are made more expert in having long duration space flights. Now again, that is more important when we are considering the space flights to Mars or to Moon, right? So that is what we need to keep in mind. Therefore, the international space station is of importance, and that can be a probable question in the prelims also. Now coming to the prelims snippet section, we have got the first article as Railway Protection Force and the Government Railway Police. Now first we need to know what a Railway Protection Force is all about. Now see, if we go back to the history of how this force came into existence, so it was in the year 1882 when we had different railway companies. Now in order to protect their properties, we had the appointment of certain guards, right? Then what happened is that it was in the year 1957 that a statutory backing was given to this, and it was enacted, a law was enacted, and then that gave a statutory backing to this force, particular force. Now again, it was declared as an armed force of the Union of India in the year 1985. It is led by a Director General who is usually a senior Indian Police Service officer. Now it is an armed force under the operational and administrative control of the Union Ministry of Railways. Do keep this in mind. Now this is tasked with protecting and securing the railway property, the passenger areas, and the passenger themselves. Now there is another body, or there is another force, which is the Government Railway Police. Please understand that this is not a part of the Union Ministry. This is a part of the District Police Force, which actually helps or facilitates the operations which are carried out by the RPF. So the GRP is a part of the District Police Force, reporting to the state government. That is important. It works alongside the Railway Protection Force and complements and strengthens its operation. They are also responsible generally for the prevention and detection of crime on railways. For example, you have got the thieves or the robbers. So it is primarily the GRP who takes that particular task in their hand. So this is what you need to know about the Railway Protection Force and the Government Railway Police. Now the next topic is with respect to the Sagarmala program. Now this Sagarmala program, it primarily aims at the holistic development of the ports in India, enhancing the connectivity, and it was primarily in the year 2015 that the Union Cabinet passed this program. Now, the Sagarmala program aims at holistic port infrastructure development along the around 7,500 kilometer long coastline through the modernization, mechanization, and computerization. Now, see, the vision of the Sagarmala program is to reduce the logistics costs. So, we have got the reduction of the logistics costs. See, what we know is that there is the logistics in India, it is fragmented, and as a percentage of GDP, the logistics cost in India is quite high when compared to other countries, right? So we need to ensure that the logistics cost goes down. Over here, a very important part is the role played by the ports. So we need to strengthen, we need to modernize the port infrastructure. So over there, the Sagarmala plays a very important role. Now there needs to be a reduction in the logistic costs for the export, import, and the domestic trade with minimal infrastructure investments. Now it focuses upon reducing the cost of the transporting domestic cargo, then optimizing the time and cost of the export import, then lowering the logistic cost of bulk commodities by locating future industrial capacities, then improving the export competitiveness by developing port proximate discrete manufacturing clusters. Now, what is being said is that before that, what we need to keep in mind is that there are 4 pillars of Sagarmala. Now, this can be really important once you're writing, especially in the mains, if you're writing about Sagarmala. So there are 4 basically the pillars of the scheme. So it is primarily the port-led development. The first is the port modernization. The second is the port connectivity. The third is the port-led industrialization. And the fourth is the coastal community development. So do remember these 4 points, which are as the 4 pillars of the Sagarmala. Now, the Sagarmala could boost the India's merchandise exports to almost $110 billion by 2025 and create an estimated 10 million new jobs. So that is what you need to know about the Sagarmala. Now, the next topic is with respect to the Central Reserve Police Force. Now, CRPF is a very important central armed police force which is under the overall jurisdiction of the Ministry of Home Affairs. So originally it was actually constituted as the Crown Representative Police in the year 1939. Now, it is one of the oldest central paramilitary forces. After independence, it was given a statutory backing and then it was renamed as Central Reserve Police Force by an Act of Parliament in the year 1949. Now, the force played a significant role during the amalgamation of the princely states. Now, we all know that once we were having the sort of consolidation of India after the independence. So there were certain states, the princely states, who were actually very reluctant to join the Indian Union. So over there was a need of the armed forces so that they can mobilize and they can get these princely states to join India. And over there, it was a CRPF which plays a very important role. Primarily, it was in the princely states of Junagadh and the principality of the Kathiawar in Gujarat, where this CRPF played a very important role. Now, what are the duties which are performed by the CRPF? First is the crowd or riot control. See, we have a specialized wing of the CRPF known as Rapid Action Force. You must have seen it's like the personnel wear the blue colored uniform. Now the blue signifies the peace, right? Now, this is primarily to actually suppress the riot-like situations and make sure that the situation is totally in control. Next, it also counters the militancy and insurgency operations. So we have got the left-wing extremism areas. Over there, it plays a very crucial role, right? Also, it plays a very crucial role in Jammu Kashmir sector. Then, as I said, it deals with the left-wing extremism, protection of the VIPs and vital installations, then checking environmental degradation and protection of the local flora, fighting aggression during the wartime, participating in the UN peacekeeping mission. Now, this is very important. CRPF personnel, along with the army, they also participate in the UN missions. Rescue and relief operations in the times of natural calamities. What you need to keep in mind is that many of these personnel who are working in the CRPF, they are also made to work in the National Disaster Response Force, right? So that is where it also plays a part in making sure that there is a proper sort of rescue and rehabilitation of those which are being affected by that particular disaster. Now, the next topic is with respect to the Golan Heights. Now, this is very important considering the geopolitics of the Middle East. So we have, if you just look at the map, we have got the country of Syria, we have got the Israel. So over here, we have got a certain part which was initially a part of Syria, but then Israel annexed it, right? And we have got this Sea of Galilee. If you just see, we have got the Sea of Galilee and it adjoins the Golan Heights, adjoins the Sea of Galilee. So it is a 1,200 square kilometer area. Now this is beside the Sea of Galilee and offers an expansive view over Syria, Israel, giving it a strategic military importance. And that is a primarily reason that Israeli forces are still occupied this. Now see, it was till the year 1967. It was initially a part of Syria, but then after the 6-Day War, Israel actually captured it, and in the year 1981, it actually annexed it. Now, this move has not been recognized internationally. Again, the importance of this position, of this place, lies in its strategic importance, its military importance, right? So that is what you need to keep in mind. Also, we had a question in the year 2015. So it was asked, the area known as the Golan Heights sometimes appear to be in the news is in the context of the events related to the Central Asia, Middle East, Southeast Asia, and Central Asia. So just keep this in mind. This might be important for the prelims. That is it for today. I hope you really like the session. Thank you so much.